Okay, so everybody's gonna tell me what I need to do about it. You know about this right here, don't you? This right here. You see how this thing's firing all of those injectors at the same time until it picks up speed, and then it starts firing them sequentially? Now, I've talked about this with enough of you guys to where you should be able to tell me why it does that. You know what I mean? So why does it start out firing all of them to begin with and then go to firing them sequentially? Why is it necessary for it to do that? Who has worked on the 350? When you're starting the 350 over there with the carburetor on it, what do you have to do?
You have to find which, or you have to...
No, you've already got it wired up and everything, and you're going to start it. What you got to do, what's the first thing you got to do? Pump the gas. Why do you got to pump the gas?
Wet the manifold.
Wet the manifold. That's why it's pumping all the injectors at the same time. Now I'm going to briefly hit you with this little war story I've talked about on some other presentations in here. So for those watching on television, you've seen this, heard me talk about this before. And you may have heard it, but there's this little Nissan Altima that wouldn't start in the morning worth a flip. But once you finally got it started, to start okay the rest of the day. And what had happened was they had it at another shop. They put a $500 engine controller and some other stuff on it to try to fix it because they couldn't figure out why it wouldn't. And I got to thinking, and what I knew about that is, I said, whenever you're turning the key to the start position, the old ones used to have a cold start injector that would wet the manifold and stuff. And then that particular one, whenever you spun it, it knew, I think it was pin 21 was supposed to get hot when you were starting it, and it would double pulse the injectors to start it up. Well, it wasn't double pulsing the injectors, and when I went to pin 21 and I checked it with my test light, it was dark when I turned it to start. And then I looked back and there was a fuse that somebody had pulled out of one place and put in another one. And the only thing that was wrong with that car that made it start hard was the fuse was in the wrong place. And, you know, and that was fairly easy fix if you understood the car. Well, when an engine's running right, the bearings, the valve train, the rings, the cylinder walls were healthy. This is sort of like hitting the highlights. The cam and the crank are spinning in time. The spark is strong. The spark plugs are clean and not excessively worn. All right. You don't want a spark plug that looks like that. And that spark plug right there, believe it or not, it's got 238,000 miles on it. Came out of that Ford Explorer. Okay. So when it's running right, it ought to be running at about 200 degrees. A cold running engine is not efficient. If you got a cold running engine, it's going to start making sludge in the crankcase if it runs cold enough, or if somebody doesn't let them warm up. Grandma and Grandpa cranks it up, drives it over to the gas station, drives it back home, drives it to the store, and don't never get it warm. It's going to be all sledged up to the point where it's going to ruin the motor. And if you go to a shop, they don't de-sludge engines usually in most of the places anymore that I've known about. They basically, if an engine is sludged up bad enough, by the time you go to the trouble to de-sludge it, it's better to just put a motor in it. Got it? So that's usually what they do. The oil's got to be clean and not contaminated. The fuel system's delivered as it should on a healthy motor, and there's good clean airflow. You also got to have good fuel quality. There was a Dodge truck. This guy came in here and he says, I filled up my Dodge truck and I didn't hardly go 2 blocks and it died and it hasn't started since. And I said, my goodness, he must have really got some lousy gas or something, or got water. And so what I like to do, if I'm thinking there may be water in the gas, is I go ahead and energize the fuel pump and let it pump into a container so I can watch it. And I let it pump all the gas out of the tank. And sooner or later you'll see some water come in there. Never saw any water. Completely emptied the tank. It only had about 5 gallons in it anyway. That gas looked and smelled just fine. Didn't smell like bad gas. You know, put your hand in it and feel of it. Wasn't a big deal there. But I put a different, I got a can of gas out of our tanker and poured it in there and it fired right up. It was bad gas, but you could not look at it. It didn't have alcohol content in it. I don't know what was wrong with that gas. That's the only time I've ever seen that. But you could actually look at that bucket of gas and it smelled like gas, looked like gas, but it wouldn't burn like gas. Not in that Dodge. That Dodge wouldn't even start. All right, so you got a clean oil, you got good strong fuel pressure. Make sure you know what your fuel pressure is supposed to be. If it's supposed to have 40 pounds, you need 40 pounds. If it's supposed to have 70 pounds, you need 70 pounds. You need to look it up, find out what it's supposed to be. I will tell you that you can have not enough fuel pressure on these old CSFI systems like that white Chevrolet pickup's got on it. If it's got 55 pounds of fuel pressure, it needs 60 or it won't start on the ones with the poppets, I like to convert those with the electronic kit. Looks the same, works the same, but a whole lot better. Causal conditions of poor or no operation, out of time a tooth or two. Late valve timing causes low engine vacuum surging, poor fuel economy. This friend of mine asked if I would take their Toyota, an 87 Camry, to the Ford place and see why it wasn't running right. And when I got it over, I found out it was 3 teeth out of time. 3 teeth out of time. And I drove it all the way from Level Plains to Dothan. And it 3 teeth, they could have put me about down, and I didn't know, you know. Of course, it wouldn't have been the valves on that one because it's a motor like the one we got to stand out there. This particular engine right here was supposed to have the timing belt changed at 102,000 miles. This happened at 108. If it's something like a Kia or another interference engine, like a little Kia Cephia or something, I've seen those. Whenever they jump time, they beats the crud out of the piston in the head and just ruins the engine. You might wind up having to put an engine in it because it snaps the head off the valves and all when they start to hit. Checking the cam and crank timing. If you line up the cam timing mark, the crank should be in time. Now you've got a frame of reference on this now because you've been working on an engine over there. See, I'm outlining it. You line up the cam timing mark, the crank mark should be every single time it ought to be lined up. If you line up the crank mark, the cam mark could be 180 out because it's only turning half the speed. So always line your cam mark up first. That's the smart way to do that. All right, so contaminated engine oil. Blow by, handled by the PCV system, but over a lot of miles, the engine and oil can be contaminated with fuel. I mean, you can, sometimes when you drain the oil out of one that hadn't had an oil change in a long time, you can smell gasoline in that oil. Because every little bit of blow by continually is going to eventually contaminate it if it hasn't been changed like it should. It can be drawn to the PCV system, create a rich condition. See that Chrysler right there? Now that Chrysler right there is one my mother drove. I mean, it's almost just, I mean, hers looked like that. It's not exactly a picture of her car, but oddly enough, the car sitting next to it looks like the car I was driving at the same time. One way or another. My dad, he says, this light is, I mean, this car has got a, let's see, what was he talking about? It has a light on, a power loss light. And I said, okay. And so I went over and I switched the key on 3 times, and it flashes the codes on a Chrysler, that vintage. It was like a 91 model. All right, now pay attention. This story is important. It flashed the light, and it threw a code. I think it was a 17. Engine's running too cold. Got it? And I says, well, it needs a thermostat put in it. It's like a PO128 or PO125 on today's cars. He said, well, I can put a thermostat in it. You know, he had a shop over there that he had retired from and closed up. So he pulled it in there, jacked it up, changed the oil. I'm taking that back. He put the thermostat in it, drove it for a couple of days, said, I think I'm going to change the oil. So he went in there and he changed the oil. He called me on the phone and he says, I changed the oil and now the car won't idle. All I did was change the oil. Tell me what's going on. Timothy's overturned into a skeleton. What do you think? When it runs too cold, it's running rich. More blow by, contaminated engine oil. He may have gone over on the oil change too. Okay, so where is this extra gasoline in the engine oil going? He started heating it up with the right thermostat. I mean, the thermostat, it was good. So his adaptive learning started changing the fuel trim to account for that extra fuel that was steaming out of the gas. Of course, it's not going to steam it all out, but it was getting something out of there. When he changed the oil, that extra fuel wasn't there anymore. It wouldn't idle. It stalled. It's like having a carburetor out of adjustment. So what would you tell him to do?
Reflash PCM.
Well, you couldn't reflash a OBD1. But you're close. You're not that far off. What you're going to do is take the battery cables off and wash the throttle body out. Put the battery cables back on, hook everything back up, ran like a top. That's the Chrysler story. But see, here's the thing. You have to kind of understand the interrelated processes instead of saying, why don't you get a throttle position sensor, why don't you get a mass airflow sensor, or why don't you get a map sensor on that one, Anyway, but the PCV system, see how that PCV system works, is basically going to be pulling air from the breather through here into the PCV system, processes it in the intake through the cylinders, right? And that's basically how that's set up. Now, you can see how the crankcase, because you're pulling, you know, out of the sump down here, you're gonna get some gas in that way. The Bronco story, here's another little story. My buddy Mark was working over there at the Ford place, and he pulled this 92 Bronco in, and it was running bad when it was cold. When you started up when it was cold, it would pop and snort and backfire and cut up. And after he warmed it up, it ran okay. And so he fought with it a while. He tried pulling codes. He didn't have any codes in there and nothing. And he worried with it. It was driving him up the wall. And so I watched him work on it, you know. And he'd clean the injectors and one thing and another. Still, he'd let it cool off and do the same thing. And I said, Mark, I want you to go out there, and I want you to, without asking any leading questions at all, I want you to ask these people what kind of gas they're using. And so he walked out there and he found the customer, and you know, either called them or something. I may have been waiting, and they says, "Oh, we're using 93 octane, best gas we can get." I said, "That's the problem." I said, "Here's what you can do. Take your, you know, because it had cooled off again. I said, take your fuel off of, you know, your fuel lines loose, loop them out, hook the injector cleaning machine up to it with some of our shop gas in there, fire it up. Not with injector cleaning stuff, just with, you know, using it, ran like a top." And I says, if you'll tell them to quit using premium gas, it'll be okay. You see, the thing about it is the quality of the gas that you put in there is going to, you know, nowadays with this E85, have you seen the E85 pumps at some gas stations? You'll see them in places. And somebody says, hey, this is cheaper, I think I'll put some of this in there. If they ain't got a flex fuel vehicle, it ain't gonna run right. All right, there's the Bronco. Premium fuel burns more slowly. How many of you knew that? Don't go to sleep, Nick. Premium fuel burns more slowly. You ain't even started. All right, so make sure you put the 87 because it lights off nice and quick. Now, Dr. Rydell is really slick. He takes the tuner that he bought, hooks it up to his Lincoln, and he retunes it for premium fuel. I mean, he's an unusual guy, you know, for, I mean, to be in the position he's in. He's always working on his cars and stuff all the time. He puts spark plugs in his doggone Porsche, and it's got one of them pancake engines in it. It's really hard to get to, but he's got some grip, I'm telling you. Weak spark typically means a bad coil. Hold that screwdriver, I got that screwdriver there that I stuck in there, hold it to the ground, that's the coil itself right there. And that spark, 1/4 of an inch is not enough. Spark ought to be blue and hot and jump almost of an inch. Ought to scare the daylights out of you, make you think it's going to kill you if it hits you. On coil packs, it's best to do the test from one tower to its companion for the best results. Now, you know, coil packs are a closed loop fire. They got one firing to the other through the plug. However, and on some of them, if you're just checking at the ground, like on a Dodge Neon or something, you may get what looks like a really weak spark. But if you check from one coil tower to the other, you'll get a good strong one. So be careful about that. Occasionally, though, coil packs will have one tower that'll just go dead, and you'll have a misfire because of that. All right. Spark wire, leaking spark. Whenever you can take a spark if you got one that's you know, whenever you've got a bite, boom, 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 that's an ignition misfire. It's typically a spark plug wire that's leaking spark. So if you think you got one of those, get you some soapy water, or with just a tiny little bit of salt in it, and spray it on the spark plug wires. And if you see one of them sprouting a spark like that, bap, 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 you found your bad wire. On the ones where the spark plug wire goes down in the hole, like on the Toyota, if you pull that thing out, and so that you can see down in that dark, if you see it jumping out the side of the wire, then you got a bad plug wire. Those are fairly easy to troubleshoot there. But what happens, the reason it happens is people wear the spark plug out to the point to where there's higher and higher and higher resistance in the spark plug, and the spark is always looking somewhere else to go, like water. It's going to go where the easiest place to go is. All right, you see that kind of leak, and you just start skipping. It's the plug wire, but check the plugs too. Look down in the wire. If you see sooty or rusty deposits in the boot, the wires need replacing too. If you see, well, I think I'm going to show you that in a minute. Always have a look at the plugs. If it's a misfire, have a look at the one that's misfiring first. Without which cylinder's misfiring. You'll probably see a plug that's sort of greasy and wet. But look at this. See how that one there is worn off an awful lot? And that one there, not so bad. That one's not so bad, and that one's worn off an awful lot. That's the wear pattern you see on coil pack. Because the spark is jumping out of the center electrode on one side and is jumping out of the ground electrode on the other side. And so you notice this one here is got a lot less wear there than this one does, in spite of the fact that these all came out of the same vehicle. You got that? All right. Now, how do you find out which cylinder is misfiring? Nick? You find out which cylinder is misfiring, or if you even started.
I ain't started.
What you gonna do? You plug in your scan tool, you're gonna look for misfire codes, right? Y'all are playing dumb with me today. Everybody's saying, ooh, we'll just sit here and shut up a while. Maybe you'll get through, then we can go back out in the shop. But think about this. You got your misfire code, or if it's an older car that doesn't have misfire monitor, how are you gonna find out which one's skipping?
Couldn't you check the spark?
Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kill the cylinders one at a time until I find one that doesn't make a difference. Got that? That's not complicated. You've done that, man. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you've done it, haven't you? You're just a barrel of fun today, aren't you? Carbon tracking. This carbon tracking used to take place in the distributor cap. Tell you what's really funny, you see people will wash their engine, the car wash, and it would crank up and do just fine. They get it home, they park it, and that water would try to evaporate and get up there, and it would bead up on the inside of the distributor cap, and it would make it cut up and misfire. Now, on some of the gray Ford distributor caps that look like that one right there, or back in the day, the ozone from the spark would react with this material here and make some stuff in the inside of the cap that looked like moisture and acted like moisture, but it wasn't moisture. It was some kind of chemical stuff that was coming out of that gray cap. Well, you know what they did to fix that?
Change the cap.
Put a vent in the cap to let the ozone out. Got it? Also, you see this chalked up spark plug, tower, or looking up in a boot, you'll see it's either dirty and rusty or it's all sooty up in there. That's because that ozone is trapped in there and it's trying to oxidize everything. That O3, every time a spark happens, but if this thing's like it ought to be, like if you put the dielectric grease in there when you snap the spark plug together, it fills in all the cavities and it won't let it jump spark anywhere except, in other words, it won't let the spark carry through anywhere except where the metal's touching. But if you don't put the dielectric grease in there, it can have little sparks, and that causes radio frequency interference and all that. But if you've got one that has started to burn the wire off up in there, and it's having to jump a spark every time, that ozone begins to attack this metal on the coil or in the wire and all that kind of thing. All right. Anyway, sometimes the car on the coil on plug system, not coil on plug, coil pack systems, the spark, see this right here? That was made from sparks jumping down the outside of the ceramic and hitting that spark plug shell. And if you happen to put a set of spark plugs in one like that without changing the wires, it's going to come back on you. Because every time it's a carbon track, it makes an easier path for spark than it had before. Octane Booster can create red dusty deposits. See that red red dust? That's not rust. That's from Octane Booster. Now, I'm not going to say every brand of Octane Booster does that, but the first time I saw that, my brother had a 71 Thunderbird. It was a cream puff. And he was putting Octane Booster in it because it was one of those 375 horsepower 429s, and he wanted to make sure he had all the power he could get out of it. Of course, it got famous gas mileage, I'm telling you. But anyway, that thing had them dusty red deposits on the plugs, and it was running terrible. And I said, that Octane Booster caused that. So anyway, put these plugs in and took care of it. This right here, see, sometimes those spark will jump to the side. See how it's been jumping to the side and carbon tracking that right there? And that one was surging and cutting up whenever you could unplug the EGR and it would stop, but the EGR wasn't a problem. It was surging because it was partially stopped up. Partially fouled out, went to the spark jumping to the side. It's not going to fire as good every time. You won't get good flame propagation or nothing else. Fuel pressure is important. Turn on the key, fuel pump runs for 2 seconds, like there's no crank pulse. My son Luke called and said that knew this guy's old guy was in his yard getting ready to pull a trailer out of there. And he says his Chevrolet has got a 2,000-mile Chevrolet pickup. He said, and it won't start. And I said, lay down on the ground with your cell phone in your hand and put your ear up against the fuel tank. So he did that, and I says, now when the guy switches it on, you ought to hear it hum for 2 seconds. So he did that. And I said, so switched it on, and he said, I don't hear nothing. I said, now hit it with your fist as hard as you can about 3 times. Wham, wham, wham. I said, have me turn it on again. And through the cell phone, I could hear the pump go, "Wing." I said, see if it'll start. I said, the guy needs a fuel pump, you know, and that was, he's off up in Augusta, you know. But anyway, the fuel pressure should hold steady and not drop off when the pump run is done, all right? So it ought to stay right there. You guys remember seeing the one the other day, fuel prep? You know, the one we put the fuel pump in the other day, on Joey's boy's truck? You might not have been involved with that, but whenever they pressured it up, it would just fall off. And it would start, or it would start, okay, just start 2 or 3 times before you let it die. All right, you notice this right here is a transistor. This is an NPN transistor. When power comes in there, it feeds the ground to that relay, and the relay actually operates the pump. I drew that on paint. Did I do a good job? The hardest part to draw was that fuel pressure gauge. It's hard to do that on paint and make it look right. Okay, fuel pressure is important. Now let me see if I can get this to play because y'all need to see this. See if I can. Here we have fuel pressure being tested with this device here, this digital transducer. It's true fuel pressure, and here we've got it on the scan tool. Now you see, there's about 10 pounds difference when the vacuum line is plugged into the rail pressure sensor. I got it in reverse. Watch what it does when I brake torque it. So brake torque it. Okay, where our fuel pressure is going way down. It's truthfully reporting from the fuel rail pressure sensor, and here I am when I'm having to recover, see, because I'm going to push the air out of the fuel rail. All right, we're going to start with a fuel filter. We've probably got a bad fuel pump on this car. Problem here, and what we got, we'll pull the vacuum hose hooked up to the fuel pressure regulator. We got 35 pounds, right? All right, so in order to smoke out this problem, we're going to pull the vacuum line off the fuel pressure regulator. Now we got 45 pounds, and when we snap accelerate, the fuel pressure goes away. We got a weak fuel pump. I don't want to play that again. Go ahead. All right, I want to tell you what I used to do. They would have these motor homes that would come in there. Motor home's got an 80-gallon gas tank because it gets about 6 miles a gallon, right? They used to. And they'd come in there and they'd say, I'm losing power and all, I'm cutting up, and I filled it up with really good gas. Well, they bring it in there with 80 gallons of gas in it. I take the engine cover off, put the fuel pressure gauge on it, just like you saw me do there, and pull the fuel pressure regulator vacuum line off. You snap the throttle, it should hold that pressure. If the pressure drops, you start with a fuel filter and you wind up with a pump, typically. Well, you got 80 gallons of gas in that thing. See what I'm saying? So I had to deal with that too. I devised a way with a couple of long pieces of all thread and some long sockets and a couple of air ratchets where I had the little tabs on the ends of the tank were good and strong where they had it bolted up. I'd take the straps off the tank and I had these long pieces of all thread with these sockets on there, and I would lower the tank with those long pieces of all thread, and then I would change out that fuel pump, and then I would put it back in there, and then I'd use them air ratchets to raise the tank back up, and I put the straps back on it. You can do it with the gas in it, you know. But I mean, the necessity is the mother of invention. You got to figure out something, you know what I'm saying? All right, so understand the big picture. Something has to tell the PCM when the engine is spinning and how fast. That's the crank position sensor down here. See that, please? Right down there is crank position sensor. All right, so your fuse box turns on the PCM, and it's paying attention to these two. And the PCM basically is going to operate the coil, and it's going to operate the injector. See the injector down there? Older systems use a distributor pickup for this. Like this distributor right here, it's got a profile ignition pickup in it. It uses that to and whenever the engine is idling, if you're listening to the injectors, they go click, 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 click. As you pick up speed, they go click, 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 click. They go faster, but there's more to it than just making them fire faster. The pulse width has got to expand, and they got to be able to control how much fuel is going there. Wake up, Nick. All right. So the information is used for ignition and fuel injection purposes, and there is that. I cannot do this right now. But anyway. So basically, here's the distributor. This is an optical distributor. Now pay close attention to this distributor right here. They see those little slots right there? There's just a few of them around there. And around the outside if you look really careful, you see a whole bunch of slots. All right, and so that's 360 slots around there. And this right here, this is basically telling it which cylinder's on TDC, and this is telling it engine speed, but it's measuring it by degree. That's optical. There's actually a, the optical, well, look at this thing right here. You see this little thing right here? This little box? Uh-oh, I guess my battery's going dead. Yep, it is. Anyway, whenever I shine on that, that light ought to come on. And basically, if you put a little window in between there, every time it goes by, it's going to create a signal that's like a square wave. It goes into the engine controller, and that's what it uses for that. Okay? Now, the crank sensor alone cannot tell us through the sequential fuel injected engine which cylinder is on top and center. The cam sensor does that. And so that information is typically used for fuel injection timing purposes, and older systems use the distributor pickup for that too. All right, so if you got sequential fuel injection, you're going to need to have a cam position sensor. Now this is pretty important. Asian V6 engines with 2 cam sensors may start hard with just 1 bad cam sensor. Here's another thing. The cam sensor will prevent some vehicles from starting. Other vehicles will start, but will just toss a 340 code. And on a Nissan Altima with a little 4-cylinder, when you unplug the cam sensor, it may start and it may not. Because it sort of guesses if it doesn't see that. If it doesn't guess right, it doesn't start. That's my way of looking at that. But some people, whenever they're fighting with one that's a little bit out of time so that it doesn't want to start right, they'll unplug the cam sensor. But you got to have that, the cam and the crank's got to be perfectly in time. Some will start sometimes, or some will start hard. Usually Fords will start if the cam sensor is unplugged. Those are the Fords that I was familiar with. Now some of them, I hadn't unplugged the one on the Crown Vic to see what it would do, but I mean most of the time it'll start on that. All right, when you turn on the key, you're going to be reading mass airflow or MAP, barometric pressure and airflow, closed throttle position, and TP movement. So it's whenever you turn it on, it locks in whatever it sees as closed throttle. That's what it needs to know. Wake up, Nick. Engine coolant temperature, intake air temperature. It's looking at those things. You ain't doing nothing at that point when you first turn the key on except calculating this and running the fuel pump. You get that? This is big picture stuff. Idling, mass airflow or MAP, all this same stuff. Valve timing now is all of a sudden a big deal. On the ones that out there have got variable valve timing, it's where that oxygen sensor is an input, that's an output there. Of course, it's also got an input from the cam and crank sensor, so I left that off this picture because I ran out of room. Evaporative control and monitor, catalyst monitoring, well that's idling, I'm sorry. Throttle control and then fans, air conditioner compressor, misfire monitoring, fuel pump, fuel injector, ignition systems. Now whenever you're driving, it's actually changing the transmission, keeping up with the transmission speeds of all of the shafts in there, and it's changing the gears for you, and then you got EGR, feedback and feeding out, and you got catalyst monitoring. This is always emissions related. When you see a check engine light, service engine soon, it doesn't mean the oil needs changing, it doesn't mean the coolant's low, but if the oil is contaminated, it can cause the check engine light to come on. If the thermostat's open and too soon or stuck open, it can cause the check engine light to come on. Just remember that. Understand the code system. A 2011 Ranger, pay attention, a 2011 Ranger has 600 possible diagnostic trouble codes. Does that boggle your mind or what? 600 possible diagnostic trouble codes. And that's a 2011. That's an old truck, right? And that's not counting the codes that can be stored by the other modules. This is just PCM codes. Look at those codes. That's a list of the codes. Right? All right, diagnostic trouble codes. We're almost through. Watch this. 0, SAE generic. 1, OEM. Can you remember OEM, original equipment manufacturer? If you got a 1 there, that means it's an OEM code. Right? 2, fuel injectors. And this right here defines the code you got. Now let's change that code and see what happens. This is generic code, SAE generic. 1, air fuel, 08, MAP sensor voltage too high. You see how the codes work? Not that complicated, right? Remember you got B, C, P, U, powertrain is what we got here. Look at this one here. This one here, 1238, fuel injectors, fuel pump driver module secondary circuit. You got that? Basically, if it's fuel pump